The next day, another advance took us across barren plains to an unfinished highway. We took our positions, digging small holes for sleeping and defense purposes. It was well we did so, for the following midday an attack burst from the wood a quarter of a mile from us. We were not caught napping, and well-directed fire drove the enemy infantry back into the woods after they had only gone a few yards. However, 4 or 5 Russian tanks in front of them continued to come on. 2 anti-tank gun units we had with us fought well with them, though we had to kick the gunners' backsides to make them do it. Good morning, I'm Pep and this is the Spanish Civil War. In this channel and for the next 3 years we'll cover week by week the Spanish Civil War, its battles and the Holocaust that it provoked. Last week we've talked a bit about the situation at the dawn of the new year for each Spain and how the warring sides have been managing their economy and political unity. We've closed the Battle of Lopera and the Aceituna campaign that resulted in more fertile land for the nationalist side. We've also started to cover the first movements of the third nationalist attempt to seize the Coruña road. So before we get too old, let's start with this offensive that we left in its cradle last week. Last week, 20,000 seasoned Moors and legionarios with air support, artillery, Panzer Is and anti-tank batteries to counter the Russian T-26 launched yet another attack in order to seize the Coruña road. This third attack, with more resources gathered than in any previous attempt, managed on the first day to dislodge the loyalist forces from Villafranca del Castillo. This week does not start well for the defending loyalist forces, as, according to Martínez Reverte, the 4th, the troops of Urirtagoyena that had seized Villafranca the day before managed to take Villanueva del Pardillo, forcing the 11th International Brigade to retreat. Meanwhile, Asensio's column already reached Majadahonda that same day, and Barrón reached the first houses of Las Rozas. The advance, though fast, is costly, as the internationals have good positions. The 5th, even if a remarkable feat takes place when 6 T-26 knock out 25 Panzer Is in Pozuelo, the Republican front collapses. The Francoist air attack, followed by fast movement of tanks and light artillery, and then 2 waves of infantry followed by more tanks, disintegrated the Republican defenses. Modesto's brigades of El Campesino, Barceló and Mera lost the connection between each other, and there was no ammunition to continue fighting. According to Thomas, Miaja even sent fake ammunition to the front just to allow the troops to keep on firing. That same day, the still under formation 35th Mixed Brigade will counterattack against Las Rozas, but will not manage to recapture the village. We've started our episode with the witness account of Frank Thomas, a Welsh legionario that took place in the Francoist attack and the mentioned loyalist counterattack against Las Rozas. We made mention last week of the anti-tank guns that supported the nationalist attack. This Thomas quote gives us the reason why. In fact, being that the Italian and German tanks were inferior to the Russian ones, anti-tank support was a must-have for the nationalist forces. But even with superior tanks, foreseeing an imminent disaster, the loyalist high command decided to send Lista's brigade from the south of Madrid to the area, as well as the 12th International Brigade that was nearby and the 14th International Brigade that was still licking the wounds suffered during the Battle of Lopera. The 6th, the situation for the loyalist forces becomes even worse as the Francoist forces reach the A Coruña road at kilometer number 13. Now they can drift towards the east and encircle the city from the north. That same day, the Talman battalion is sent to Las Rozas with orders of holding its position without retreating. The Germans will fight during the whole day. By the 7th, they will receive the order to advance, but they will be forced to reply. Impossible. The Talman battalion has been destroyed. But it was not the only one. all of the 11th International Brigade battalions suffered heavy losses. And yet again, the internationals where the battle rages the most. The fight continued during the following days, all along the front line, from the Rozas to la Puerta del Hierro. According to historians like Martínez Reverte, Orgaz stopped his offensive at the gates of Madrid, there the 9th, because he had already achieved his objectives and because he had run out of reserves. Cardona instead does not talk about any achieved objective, but points out that Orgaz troops reached the bridge of San Fernando over the Manzanares but could not hold it, because, and here both historians are to agree, Orgaz had no more reserves to throw in. Cardona also mentions the role of the Republican artillery in stopping the advance's forces at Monte del Prado, and the fact that maybe, just maybe, Orgaz dispersed his artillery and tanks too much. To see what will happen, we have to wait until next week. But for now, the nationalist forces have managed to drive back the loyalist defenders from their positions and managed to advance day after day, endangering the Republican positions. But the cost has been high, and by the end of the week it looks like Orgaz offensive has lost its momentum, as more and more Republican reinforcements reach the area, among them the 12th and the 14th International Brigades, that arrived by the end of the week. Orgaz offensive has endangered the capital of Spain. Again, according to Martínez Reverte, the situation this week for the city was as dangerous as it was at the middle of November. At the end of this episode, you will find a link to that period of time when the battle for Madrid was raging. But now we have to dive in the seas before going to the international sphere, as this week there have been some interesting developments there. So, in the seas we have one mantra: naval blockade. This week, the 8th, the Canarias and the Almirante Cervera will seize the loyalist tanker Campuzano that was coming from France full of petrol. Meanwhile, near Bilbao, the destroyer Velasco captured the Russian merchant Smidovic, but will be repelled this same week by 3 Republican boats, Guipúzcoa, Navarra and Vizcaya, that were protecting a convoy. And again, the night of the 8th, the Navarra alone prevented the mining of the port of Bilbao by the mine layer Genoveva that was escorted by the destroyer Velasco. What is a bow, you may ask? Bows were small fishing boats with around 1,200 tons of displacement that would be armed and used by each warring side of the Spanish Civil War. Being adapted vessels, the armament they carried varied, but the ones mentioned above carried 2 Vickers cannons, 100.6 L40 and 2 machine guns. Velasco, the nationalist destroyer that the bows faced this week, had the same displacement as the bows, but had 3 Vickers, 101 L50. Leaving the seas behind, we'll start our trip through the international stage, talking about the mighty United States of America. Back in December, the 26th of December to be more precise, the first organized group of North American volunteers departed from New York. This group will reach this week, on the 6th, the day of the Epiphany, their base in Albacete. Now, let's take some time to talk about the United States, because that same 6th of January, while some of their fellow citizens reached Albacete, Congress met to discuss 2 resolutions made by the President and aimed to forbid any weapon export to Spain. This was done because Bimalert Enterprise, opposing the government neutrality policies, managed to obtain export licenses worth $2,755,000 for Spain. Even if some senators like the Republican Gerald Knight and some congressmen consider these resolutions as an act of false neutrality that favored Franco, the resolutions were approved, even though some delay in the application allowed the Mar Cantábrico, that was actually in New York, to load some material and send it to Spain. Regarding our beloved Non-Intervention Committee, the 5th of January, Portugal, and then on the 7th, Germany and Italy will answer the Anglo-French proposal regarding the volunteers. Hitler himself will write Germany's answer, quoting that even if the proposal would be unfair due to the fact that the Republican side was full of international volunteers, Germany will accept it, if effectively controlled. But now it's Eden that finds himself with some difficulties convincing the Admiralty to use the Royal Navy to proceed with the blockade. In this line, he'll write in an internal party note, the 8th, "Right now, it's less of a concern for the peace in Europe, which will be the government in Spain, than the fact that the dictators may come out victorious." We've already talked about the progressive change of opinion of the British ruling classes regarding the Spanish Civil War, from sympathy for the rebels because of their own economic interest to the mistrust generated by the German and Italian hidden intervention. So, we talked last week about the first commercial agreements between the UK and Francoist Spain. So, it does not look like this change of sympathies is going to lead anywhere. The sympathies of the French government, instead, were clear since the beginning of the war, favoring the Popular Front. And of course, they were watching very carefully for any German movement. In fact, the 7th of January, an international crisis started to brew when the French government realized that 300 Germans had disembarked in the Spanish protectorate of Morocco. That was against the Franco-Spanish Agreement of 1912. Franco because France, not because of Franco, of course. That specified that neither Germany nor France would build up against each other in the Spanish or French Maghreb. The French army proceeded to occupy some positions along the border with the Spanish protectorate, but after a public declaration by Germany that stated that they had no intention of building up in that region and that their troops were in Melilla, and that was not against the Franco-Spanish Agreement, the crisis faded away as it arrived. After this long glance at the international stage, we'll go now towards the rearguard, and we'll start talking about bombardments. Nationalist bombardments took place against Bilbao and Madrid the 4th of January, the last one resulting in a saga that killed 100 prisoners. Another bombardment takes place in the south against Malaga and Almería, and it could be considered the prelude of an operation that has been brewing lately in the mine of Capo de Llano, with the continuous arrival of Italian troops. The seizure of Malaga. The nationalist forces will start the 10th and maneuver in order to seize, one after another, all the villages between their lines and Malaga. We will cover this offensive and how the loyalist forces will try to counter it during the following days. In both rearguards, meetings and conferences are made by the different political organizations in order to gain material support and more adepts to their cause. Women, and we already know that, played a crucial role in the Spanish Civil War, in the front and in the rearguard. And this role was determined also by the vision of women that was behind the warring sides. This week, with this in mind, Salamanca holds the first National Congress of Falange's feminine section. In Valencia, instead, in the loyalist rearguard are the socialist youth that are mobilizing and will hold this week their National Congress too. This organization, created in April 1936, was supposed to merge socialists and communist youth, but was effectively ruled by the communists. With these congresses, we closed the second week of the victory year, or the triumphal year, that will bring blood and pain for the Spanish people. As promised, here you will find a link to our episode covering the crucial weeks of the Battle of Madrid. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. If you enjoyed it, share it. We have to bring light to the history of Spain. If you're able to support us in our Patreon channel, as these heroes already did, or offer us a coffee, this would also be great and would help us to carry on and improve the project. Let's make this possible all together. Thanks for your attention, goodbye, and salute.